Once upon a time, there lived a woman named Adaeze who married into a family that never truly accepted her. Her husband, Emeka, was a kind and gentle man who worked hard and loved his wife sincerely. But his mother, Mama Chioma, was a different story entirely. From the very first day Adaeze stepped into that house as a new bride, Mama Chioma made it clear, not with loud words at first, but with small cuts and cold silences, that her son had made a terrible mistake. She was too thin, Mama Chioma told the neighbors, too quiet, too slow in the kitchen, too common for a man with a university degree and a good job in the city. She did not say these things to Adaeze's face in the beginning. She said them to aunties at the market, to old friends at church, to cousins who visited and went back home carrying the story like a gift. Every morning Mama Chioma found something wrong. The soup was too watery. The rice was overcooked. The floor had not been swept into the corners properly. The shirts were ironed with creases in the wrong places. Nothing Adaeze ever did was good enough for that woman, and yet Adaeze kept quiet, kept smiling, and kept trying. Emeka saw what was happening and tried to defend his wife when he could. He would say, gently, that the food tasted fine to him, that the house looked clean, that Adaeze was doing her best. But Mama Chioma was clever in the way that only certain kinds of cruelty can be clever. She never showed her true face when her son was watching. The moment Emeka left for work, the mask would fall and the real woman would appear. "You think you can come into my son's life and take everything?" Mama Chioma would say, her voice low and sharp like a knife pressed against skin. "You have nothing. You came from nothing. You brought nothing to this house except your 2 empty hands. And one day very soon you will go back to nothing." Adaeze would swallow her tears, lower her eyes, and continue her chores. She was a patient woman. She had been raised by a mother who told her that fire that burns quietly lasts longer than fire that roars. She believed that time and consistent kindness would eventually soften her mother-in-law's heart. People change, she told herself. Love reaches even the hardest places if you give it enough time. But what Adaeze did not know was that Mama Chioma's hatred had roots that went far deeper than anything kindness alone could reach. 3 years into the marriage, Adaeze had not yet become pregnant. This became Mama Chioma's favorite weapon, the sharpest blade in a drawer full of sharp things. She began whispering to Emeka in private that Adaeze might be barren. She told relatives that the girl was hiding a medical problem she had known about before the wedding. She invited a distant cousin, a bold and fashionable woman named Ngozi, to visit the house for weeks at a time, cooking loudly, laughing with Emeka about old memories, filling every room with her presence in a way that was clearly designed to make Adaeze feel invisible in her own home. But Emeka remained loyal. He was not a foolish man. He saw what his mother was doing, and he did not pretend otherwise. He told Ngozi plainly, after her 3rd long visit, that his house was not a place for matchmaking. He told his mother, quietly but firmly, that his marriage was not a problem that needed her solution, and that quiet, steady loyalty was the thing that Mama Chioma could not forgive. It only made her more desperate. One evening, when the harmattan wind was blowing dry and cold through the compound, Emeka packed a bag for a work conference that would take him away for 4 days. He kissed his wife goodbye at the door, told her to call him if anything was needed, and drove away. It was just Adaeze and Mama Chioma alone in the house. The first day passed quietly. The second day passed the same way. Then on the third evening, Mama Chioma appeared in the doorway of the parlor where Adaeze was sitting and offered, for the very first time since the marriage, to cook dinner. "Let me cook tonight," she said, and her voice carried something Adaeze had never heard in it before, something that almost sounded like warmth. "You have been working hard all week. Sit down and rest, my daughter." My daughter, those two words hit Adaeze somewhere soft. She felt her chest open slightly. She thought, perhaps this is it. Perhaps something has shifted. Perhaps the long wait is finally beginning to end. She sat in the parlor and waited gratefully while the sounds of cooking came from the kitchen, oil heating in the pan, the dull thud of the mortar, the smell of onions softening. Adaeze closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to feel something close to peace. When the food was ready, Mama Chioma carried 2 plates into the parlor and set them on the table. She placed one in front of Adaeze and kept one at her own seat, then straightened up and said she needed to take a phone call in her room. She walked away down the corridor. The door closed behind her. Adaeze looked at the food. It smelled fine. It looked fine. There was nothing obviously wrong with it, but something felt wrong. She could not name it. It was not a thought exactly. It was a feeling that lived just under thinking, that quiet, animal kind of knowing that a person usually only listens to when it is already too late. Adaeze sat very still and paid attention to it. Minutes passed. Mama Chioma did not return. Adaeze looked more carefully at the 2 plates. They were the same white plates from the same set, the ones she washed every day. But then she noticed something. On the underside of the plate in front of her, there was a thin scratch, small and deliberate, the kind of mark that would only be visible if you were looking for it. It looked as though someone had pressed a key or a pin against the ceramic to tell this plate apart from the other one. Adaze's hands went cold. She sat there for another moment, completely still, thinking. She thought about the warmth in Mama Chioma's voice when she offered to cook. She thought about how long the woman had been alone in that kitchen. She thought about the phone call that had conveniently pulled her out of the room before the eating began. She thought about Ngozi. She thought about the whispers to relatives. She thought about 3 years of small cruelties that had never once broken into open violence until now. With hands that were trembling but certain, Adaeze switched the plates. She placed the marked plate where Mama Chioma's plate had been sitting and moved the unmarked one to her own side. Then she sat back, folded her hands in her lap, and arranged her face into the same calm expression she wore every day. Mama Chioma returned from her room a few minutes later. She looked at the table when she entered, just briefly, the way someone looks at a thing they expect to find exactly where they left it. Then she sat down across from Adaeze and smiled. "Eat," she said pleasantly, "before it gets cold." They sat together in the flickering light of the parlor television. Adaeze moved her food slowly, bringing small amounts to her lips, mostly just rearranging it on the plate while watching Mama Chioma from beneath her lashes. The old woman ate with the relaxed appetite of someone who had already decided how the evening would end. They exchanged a few words about the weather, about a neighbor's new baby, about nothing at all. Then they cleared the table and said good night. Adaeze went to her room. She did not sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to every sound in the house, with the focused stillness of a woman who understands that her life depends on staying alert. She heard the television go off. She heard the creak of floorboards as Mama Chioma moved to her room. She heard the house settle into quiet. Around 2 in the morning, the quiet broke. A low groan came from the direction of Mama Chioma's room. Then the sound of urgent movement, heavy and stumbling. Then a thud, then silence that was worse than the sounds that came before it. Adaeze rose from her bed. She moved down the corridor and stood outside the closed door. She listened, nothing. She knocked gently, nothing. She opened the door. Mama Chioma was on the floor beside the bed, her body curled at a wrong angle, her breathing shallow and labored. Her face was damp with sweat. Her hands were pressed against her stomach. Adaeze stood in the doorway for 1 long second. Then she went to the woman who had tried to kill her and knelt down beside her. She called the neighbors. She called for help. She stayed right there on the floor with her mother-in-law until the emergency vehicle arrived, holding the old woman's hand, even as those hands had once marked a plate that was meant to end her. The hospital worked on Mama Chioma through the night. Adaeze called Emeka from the corridor outside the emergency ward. Her voice was steady. She told him his mother had collapsed and was being treated. She told him to come home. She did not tell him anything else. He arrived the next morning, still wearing his conference clothes, his eyes wide and frightened. He found his wife sitting alone in the corridor, with a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. "What happened?" he asked. "What did she eat? What did she drink? Did she take her blood pressure medication? Did something happen before you found her?" Adaeze looked at him quietly. "She will be okay," she said. "The doctors are working. Wait." 3 days passed. Mama Chioma stabilized. The doctors confirmed that she had ingested a toxic substance. The hospital called in the authorities as they were required to do. Investigators came. They asked questions. They examined what remained in the kitchen. They took the plates from the sink where they had sat, still unwashed, since that evening. The marked plate tested clean. The unmarked plate tested positive. The investigator sat across from Emeka in a small room off the main ward and explained what the findings showed. Emeka listened without moving. His face became the face of a man who is watching the ground he is standing on slowly give way beneath him. He went to his mother's bedside after that. He sat down in the chair beside her and looked at her for a long time without speaking. Mama Chioma looked back at him. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her. The authority she had always carried like a second skin had left her, and without it she was just an old woman in a hospital gown with tubes in her arm and nowhere left to hide. An investigator stood quietly in the corner of the room. A nurse checked a monitor near the door. "Mama," Emeka said, his voice very low, "tell me the truth." Mama Chioma opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at her hands, and then, all at once, she collapsed inward, the way old certainties collapse when the thing holding them up is finally removed. "I did it," she said. The room went very still. "I put it in her food." Her voice was thin and cracked, the voice of someone who is exhausted by the effort of having carried something heavy for too long. "I wanted her gone. I wanted my son back. I wanted things to go back to how they were before she came." Emeka stood up from the chair. He stood there for a long moment, looking at his mother. Something was happening in his face that had no name in any language. Some private interior thing that was breaking quietly and permanently. Then he turned and walked out of the room. Adaeze was standing in the corridor. He stopped when he saw her. She was leaning against the wall with her arms folded loosely across her chest, and she was looking at him with an expression that was not anger, and was not triumph, and was not grief. It was something older and quieter than any of those things. She switched the plates. Mama Chioma's voice drifted out from the room behind him. It carried a strange note, something between accusation and disbelief. How did she know? Emeka looked at his wife. "You knew," he said. "I suspected," Adaeze replied simply. He put his hand over his mouth. He stood there with his hand pressed over his mouth and his eyes shut for what felt like a very long time. When he lowered his hand, his eyes were red. "She tried to kill you," he said. "Yes, in our own house, in the house where you live, while I was away." He stopped. He pressed his hand over his mouth again. Then, "I am sorry. I did not protect you. I did not see what was happening directly in front of me, and I did not protect you." Adaeze reached out and placed her hand on his arm. Her grip was gentle but steady. "You did not know," she said. "Now you do." The weeks that followed were the most difficult the family had ever known. The legal process moved forward because a poisoning, once reported to the hospital, does not simply go away because the family would prefer it to. Mama Chioma was charged. Because of her age and her deteriorated health, she was not imprisoned, but she was placed under supervised care outside Emeka's home and ordered into mandatory counseling. She would not be returning to that house. That was made clear. The relatives descended like a storm. Phone calls came from every direction. Auntie's Adaeze had never met call to tell her that she was destroying the family. Cousins accused her of using the situation to drive a wedge between a mother and her son. One uncle called 3 times in a single day to tell her that an African woman endures, that what happens inside a home stays inside a home, that she had embarrassed everyone by allowing the matter to reach the authorities. Adaeze listened to all of them. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She thanked them for calling and ended the conversations quietly and continued to live. What no one expected was what she did next. Several weeks after the matter had been handled and the house had grown quiet again, Adaeze sat down with Emeka one evening and told him something that made him stop completely and look at her as though she had said something in a language he was still learning. "I forgive her," she said. Emeka looked at his wife for a long moment. "Adaeze, not for her sake," she continued, her voice calm and certain. "For mine. I refuse to carry her hatred inside me. It already tried to kill me once from the outside. I will not allow it to finish the job from the inside." Emeka was quiet for a while. Then he asked her what forgiveness looked like, in this case for a thing this serious. Adaeze told him clearly. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean pretending that a wrong was not a wrong. It did not mean opening the door and saying, "Come back in. Nothing happened. Let us all eat together again." It meant releasing the bitterness from her own body so that she could breathe fully again. It meant choosing her own peace over the long, exhausting work of sustaining hatred. But Mama Chioma would not return to their home, not based on words alone, only if genuine change was shown over time, not promised in a hospital room to avoid consequences, but demonstrated consistently over months. Only if Emeka himself was certain of it, only if Adaeze herself felt safe. Emeka honored every condition without argument. He visited his mother regularly because she was still his mother and he was still her son, and that bond did not simply dissolve because of what she had done. But he came home every evening to his wife, and he came home differently than he ever had before. He paid attention in a new way. He asked questions he had never thought to ask before. He listened. He began to understand, slowly and painfully, the kind of quiet suffering that Adaeze had been managing inside their own home for 3 years while he moved through his days, assuming that everything was basically fine. He understood that love without vigilance is not protection, that a man can love his wife completely and still fail to see what is happening to her right in front of him if he is not paying attention with both eyes open. He worked to rebuild what had been cracked, not loudly, not with grand gestures, but in the daily steady way that real repair always happens, with consistency and honesty and the willingness to be uncomfortable with his own past blindness. Then one morning, about 8 months after that terrible night, Adaeze came to him with a quiet smile and news that she had been waiting to be certain of before she spoke it. She was pregnant. Emeka sat down on the edge of the bed and covered his face with his hands. When he lifted his face, it was wet. They did not call anyone right away. They sat together for a while in the early morning light, just the two of them, with the news held gently between them like something fragile and precious that did not yet need to be shared with the world. When the news eventually reached Mama Chioma through a relative who visited her in the facility where she was staying, she reportedly sat in silence for a very long time and said nothing at all. The woman who had spent 3 years trying to remove Adaeze from the story found that Adaeze had only grown more deeply written into it. The woman who had cooked poison into a meal meant to end a life found instead that the life she had tried to end was now creating another. Time, as it always does, had its say. And the lesson carried inside this story is a simple one, though the people who most need to hear it are often the last to learn it. Hatred disguised as love is still hatred. A mother who poisons the wife of her own son does not truly love her son. She only loves her control over him, her ownership of him, her refusal to share him with anyone she did not choose. Real love does not destroy the people who are precious to the ones it claims to love. Real love protects. Real love endures. Real love chooses the good of another, even when that choice is costly. The story also teaches that patience and quiet alertness are not signs of weakness in a woman. Adaeze never shouted. She never fought. She never made scenes or sent threatening messages or gathered allies to her side. She simply watched, stayed clear-eyed, and when the moment came, she acted with a calm intelligence that saved her own life without anyone else in the room knowing that anything had happened at all. And perhaps most importantly, the story teaches that forgiveness and wisdom are not opposites. You can release the poison of bitterness from your own heart without pretending that wrong was right. You can choose peace without choosing blindness. You can say, I forgive you, and still say you may not come back in here until I am certain you have changed. Adaeze forgave, and Adaeze held her ground. And that combination, that particular pairing of mercy and wisdom is not a contradiction. It is the mark of a woman who knows exactly who she is.